I was going to talk about specifically artificial intelligence and how it is applied in education, and also some of what have been the changes and the trends during the pandemic in terms of application of artificial intelligence. Um, I have a particular perspective on this because what I'm most concerned about is how artificial intelligence and its application at the moment is definitely biased against small minorities and outliers, and perpetuates patterns of the past because we're optimizing. AI uses data from the past to optimize those patterns, so to amplify, automate, and accelerate those patterns. So that's what I was going to talk about, and I was going to talk about how that is currently having an impact during the pandemic, specifically with things like what are called intelligent tutors, or instructional tutors that use AI, and the proctoring systems, the online proctoring systems. But I'm very open to talking about other topics as well, or relevant topics. Does that interest you, Doug, Ildiko, and Edwin?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I wonder if you would mind. I gave what was called a walrus talk. It's sort of like a TED talk, but the Canadian equivalent. Up here we have something called the Walrus Magazine, and it sort of compresses a lot of the points that I want to make into a quick 7-minute talk. Is it okay if I play that and then we can discuss it? Because I'm being lazy today. I've been giving talks since 8 this morning, and so this is somewhat of a accelerated package of that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen, and can you hear that as well?
Hello. Yes. I'm Jutta Tabranis, and I'm the founder and director of the Inclusive Design Research Center, and I want to talk to you about counting. With the rise of the power tools of data science, we're counting more and more aspects of our lives, and the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. On the train ride here, I sat beside someone in charge of data analytics at a large company, and he told me he measured each employee's every movement to find greater efficiencies no human would have thought of. I've been very worried about what happens to small minorities, unique individuals, or outliers in decisions based on these numbers. Generally, when we're measuring, the bigger the number, the better. Businesses want to reach the largest customer base. Governments want to invest in measures that benefit the largest number of voters. And if you're vying for attention, you want the largest number of likes, even in the social media, Twitter. And your interest is drawn to the highest
Twitter
scores.
Was there
Our expectations regarding the size of the number keeps rising. Counting even determines such fundamental qualities as truth and worth. If you claim that something is true, as a researcher, you want the largest number of consistent measures, and to qualify as evidence, it must be measurable. Often only that which can be counted is attributed worth or value, and the higher the number, the better. In 2016, I discovered that our artificial intelligence systems amplify and automate this bias towards large numbers to an alarming effect. I was able to test several machine learning models designed to guide automated vehicles through intersections. They tell the car to stop, change direction, or proceed. I decided to test them with someone unexpected. I have a friend who very efficiently propels her wheelchair backwards with her feet. Her movements are erratic but effective, and people in the intersection often assume that she's lost control and try to push her back onto the curb she came from. All the machine learning models chose to run her over. The developers assured me that the models were immature, not smart enough, and I should come back when they had been exposed to more data regarding people in wheelchairs and intersections. When I came back to test the smarter models, they chose to run my friend over with greater confidence. They were confident, based on the data, that people in wheelchairs move forward. I realized that artificial intelligence makes manifest a bias that has always been there, our human inability to deal with diversity and complexity. If you were to take all the needs of everyone here in this room and plot them on a multivariate scatter plot, you would have a starburst. There would be a dense cluster in the middle with about 80% of the needs taking up 20% of the space. The remaining 20% of the needs would be scattered over the remaining 80% of the space. This is called the normal distribution, a phenomenon Pareto discovered to arrive at his 80-20 rule. The data elements in the middle would be close together or more similar. The data elements as you move from the middle would be further and further apart or more and more diverse. As a consequence, you'll also find that designs of almost everything work for the needs in the middle, are difficult as you move from the middle, and don't work if your needs are at the edge, where there are no economies of scale. This is in large part thanks to the 80-20 rule, which says to focus on the 80% that take up 20% of the effort and ignore the difficult 20% that occupy the edges. So what happens if you're a small number? If the value you create is not quantifiable, if what you want or need is not popular, if the government program that is essential to you does not benefit many voters, if the products you depend on only have a tiny market, you will likely discover that you do not count or you do not measure up. Your efforts won't be valued. Think of the innumerable caregivers and their essential roles and how they are enumerated. The things you say will receive little attention. Who pays attention at the painful indignities of dying with a rare, incurable illness? The programs you depend upon will be defunded. Ask the many people who experience low incidence disabilities, whose critical services are at the mercy of political whims or evidence-based governance by the numbers. The products and services you will need will be hard to find, and if you find them, they will cost more and be less reliable. Have you ever gone shopping for information or services in small minority languages? Because you're an anomaly, security system will perceive you as a threat. Try going through airport security with a declared gender that doesn't match your physical parts. You may find yourself in a vicious cycle of exponential injustice. Because you don't count for very much, you can't participate. Because you can't participate, you can't help define what counts, so you don't count. The impact of this creates a growing disparity that ripples through all our aspects of our society. Most of our counting requires sameness and conformity. Deviation discounts you. Advocacy groups fight for representation of an identity group with a well-defined and defended set of common characteristics. What if no one can represent your unique needs and characteristics? What if no one claims you as a counting member? Even our existing instruments of justice rely on being measured and counted. It's hard to measure equivalence when we have unbounded diversity. Judging or deciding demands clear sums, possible relationships, and imaginable futures have no total. Complexity is impervious to counting. The cyclical has no sum. We ignore the small numbers, the immeasurable, unbounded, at our peril. It is the rare small numbers that have the largest disruptive heft. Weak signals are the only warning signals we have of the most life-changing events. Not very many people populate the extreme edges or margins, but that is where true innovation can be found. We're all variable. Ignoring our differences has resulted in the dire consequences of treating humans as a mass. It means that the systems we design lack flexibility, resilience, and responsiveness. Mass systems demand conformance and produce waste. They reduce the diversity that is our greatest asset and our key to survival. If we design with people that have needs at that outer edge, we benefit everyone. If we can't escape the seduction of large numbers, it should be noted that adding up all those small and diverse numbers that are discounted collectively and eventually comes to the biggest sum. The one prediction with the greatest probability is that we will all find ourselves at that outer edge. It will not cost more. And how should we measure, decide, and judge? Gandhi has been attributed with a great suggestion. The true measure of any society can be found in how we treat its most vulnerable members. When we make room for our differences and variability, we find a deeper commonality. Exposure to diversity guards against extremism and creates greater social equilibrium. Unless we include those small heterogeneous numbers and the frequently immeasurable numbers, we have a distorted truth. Our evidence is incomplete, and our blind spots occlude the most critical bits. If it takes large homogeneous numbers for us to pay attention, assign worth, and acknowledge truth, we're setting ourselves up for an impoverished and inhumane life. Difference and unbounded variability is a reality, and anything living should not be a digit. So count out to the edge.
So that was done well before the pandemic, and it was done before the Uber car hit a pedestrian walking a bike across the road. And of course, the pandemic was brought about in large part because we missed some weak signals. As a result of that and a number of the other talks that I've been giving, there's been a lot more attention to the research that we have within the WeCount project. And actually, one of the talks I gave this morning was together with a researcher called Kevin Deere, who was looking at Indigenous research methods and the alignment and complementarity of the practice that we have, or inclusive design. And it's quite interesting to see just how similar and how supportive of each other the types of strategies that I'm working on are to what is seen as an Indigenous research. But I would love to, so how is this relevant to education and to pedagogy and our teaching methods and the research proposals that you just submitted or you're about to submit? Actually, I was telling Al before everybody joined that another talk I gave this morning was to tell the research councils, including the US, the Canadian, and the European research councils, that their application process, the method of selecting the research and the method of monitoring the success of the research are all biased against minority views. So that what is seen as valid form methodology, what is how it's decided who will get funded or not, the template you have to use to create your proposal, all of that is biasing against currently excluded and minority views and perpetuating a system that is not going to allow innovation or stretching the ways of knowing. That's another thing I would love to discuss, but I'm wondering what your impressions are of what I was saying.
I really enjoyed it. That was very interesting. That was. Did you only have 7 minutes? Was that your limit?
So I had to go very, very quickly at the end, and they kept seeing these numbers, wrap out quickly. So I truncated part of what I wanted to say.
And did you really have a sit next to a data analytics guy that gave you that perspective on the way to that meeting? That really happened?
Yeah, I took a train it was done in Waterloo, and I took what we call our GO train. Yes, I sat beside somebody who happened to me.
That's a great coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I thought it was well laid out and well presented, all the concerns about AI and its impact on smaller minority communities, and how research does not reflect the outliers in the population. And if if the research doesn't reflect the outliers in the population, then the outcomes of the research, the recommendations, the decision making that's done based on that research will not be inclusive of those populations. So I thought what you put out there was, at least that's how I understood it, and I think it's a very, very important set of issues. What is the where do you look for the solution to?
Well, so the other points to make, and of course the pandemic has really emphasized this, is that this idea that none of us are safe until all of us are safe, right? I mean, previously we were so concerned with the majority, and even in our defense of democracy, in our defense of evidence and science, we've reduced them. And so democracy becomes one person, one vote, and as opposed to a fuller, more holistic view of democracy. And so what results from that is the trivial needs of the many will outweigh the critical, life-saving, essential needs of the few. If there's a politician in my jurisdiction that is trying to get voted back in, the fact that if there's a lot of people that are worried about the pothole in front of their driveway, and there's only one or two people that are worried about essential services needed to save their kids, it'll be the potholes that win out, unless we have a richer, more fulsome understanding of democracy. Similarly, if we, well, I mean, that ripples through all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
What we see as truth and evidence and proof of something, when we look at the evidence-based or scientific-based arguments, if we only accept CRT or the sort of valorized or preferred methods of research, then we are inevitably going to miss those weak signals, and we're going to prevent ourselves from innovating, because life isn't in a clean lab. We are not looking at the patterns within a homogenized group or homogenic group, which is the assumption of traditional research methods. Quantitative, empirical, evidence-based research requires either a control group, and what if you can't be represented? And it requires that you isolate the conditions, or as much as possible create the conditions of a clean lab, so that there aren't things that are compounding your experiment. They begin with a hypothesis and test it, as opposed to so that the question is already predetermined. It can't arise. So what in fact what you need to discover is not yet part of that set of determinants that you are concerned with. And anyways, there's lots of other reasons.
Yes.
But the problem is that AI perpetuates that. So it automates, amplifies, accelerates whatever has happened in the past. All data is from the past. So you can't have culture change. You cannot, if you use artificial intelligence, machine learning, with workforce surveillance, with where say the Uber drivers, they're surveilled and they're rewarded for doing, or the Amazon delivery people. There is an algorithm which determines what your behavior should be, and if your behavior isn't like that, then you are docked points, and you're punished for that, or rewarded if you conform to that particular formula. So there's examples of Amazon delivery people who tried to be kind to the customers they were at, and they did something that made their trip longer, or didn't do the correct handoff, and that is then punished, or they're docked pay or star rating or things of that nature. So we eliminate the opportunity both for addressing exceptions, but also for doing things in a better way, rather than where better becomes more and more like the determined success of the past. But there's lots of applications within research and within education as well. How many of you have heard of intelligent tutoring systems and intelligent proctoring systems? No.
I'm raising my hand.
Okay, so two things have become much more prominent during the pandemic. One is these automated intelligent tutors, and they are supposed to be an answer to students who fall behind. They're or struggling students, so that they can catch up. And basically, rather than having a tutor or like a human tutor or instructor, it takes you through a series of exercises that are supposedly personalized, such that you achieve whatever the learning goal is or the learning outcome. And the things are sold for a way to sort of efficiently, effectively assist struggling students. But in fact, it's the inverse of that, because what is seen as it's based upon learning from students that have done well. And so if you do things differently, or if you learn differently, or if you have a anomalous way of arriving at success in your learning, then it's going to be much harder for you. If you're very much like the average, it works quite well. So it actually is also biased against struggling students. The other thing about it is that it shapes all students towards an optimal average, or to be typical, normal, to not deviate. And so if you're more creative, if you want to learn something different, if you want to go in a different pattern, if you want to approach what you want to learn from backwards or sideways, then you can't do that. It really constrains you. And so if you want to explore different teaching methods, if you want to apply your learning to different topics, all of that is constrained in these instructional tutors. But it's being sold to, so Squirrel AI is a large company, and I think it was something like $50 million in the US has been spent on these instructional intelligent tutors, together with the proctoring systems. The proctoring systems became extremely popular in post-secondary education and high-stakes testing, especially in the US during the pandemic. And these are, rather than having a human proctoring an exam, it's an online proctoring system that's using an intelligent monitoring system or surveillance system. And so it determines whether you are who you say you are, and it flags any perceived cheating. But cheating is any deviation from the norm. So if I stare off if I don't keep my eye on the screen, if I do something different with my hands, if I have a worried facial expression, if I'm in almost anything that isn't complete and utter focus on the screen, is flagged as cheating. And students have been so stressed out by this that they have been too scared to go to the washroom. They've broken out in tears. It's a pretty horrific system. And of course, any anomalous behavior, like, well, with the group that I work with, students with disabilities um, are always like there's so many false positives where almost any behavior that they engage in is seen as cheating or is flagged as cheating. But so those are some of the things that I'm concerned with. But I'd love to hear whether any of this is actually applicable in your teaching and learning, or whether you've heard of these systems and what your thoughts are.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I apologize. My neighbors are cutting grass, and there's that droning noise here. So, well, I teach in a small college, and I was hoping that we would not have to resort to these methods, but unfortunately, the administration really likes them. So we have Turnitin to check for plagiarism. And well, I kind of persuaded them that we should not use it as a system that would actually determine if a student plagiarized or not, because it's more complicated, but as a learning tool so that they can look at the numbers and they can actually check why that program detected it. And it's very basic in my opinion, so I don't know if it ever will be perfected to achieve the goal that it was designed for, because I mean they have a database, and of course students tend to write papers on the same topics and they use the same citations, and those all are flagged as similarities, and it's very annoying, and I don't really think that it teaches much other than causes some confusion. We also have the proctoring system, and I was frustrated with that because I actually want the students to look down and read the text that they are writing an essay about. So I somehow managed to change the setting so that looking down was not red flagged. And I also insisted to alert the students ahead of time that they will be on camera so that they have a choice. You know, many of them have living conditions, for example, that they may not necessarily want other people to view. So I had to put in some instructions to warn them that do not wear or do anything that you don't want other people to see. And I saw at least they have a right to know the people who can see them while they are taking the exam, in addition to the instructor, the college administrator, and of course, everybody who is running the program. So yes, I mean, I don't even want to talk about the tutoring, but that is called brain fuse, which is especially harmful with writing, you know, because these programs are very good at recognizing patterns, but they are not good at interpreting what the patterns mean. So while they just kind of come up with stuff like you have too many short sentences or long sentences, and to me as a writing teacher, that is a meaningless. It's an interesting piece of information, but it does not really help me determine the quality of writing. But I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I have all these concerns. So I definitely am glad that somebody shares those.
Yeah, and you've brought up some really great points. I mean, what happens to collaborative learning when Turnitin and the opportunity? Well, I mean, just we need more collaboration actually than individual sprung from. I mean, thought is never completely independent. It doesn't spring from nothing. Much of thinking and knowledge comes from other ideas, etc. So we've been seeing some Turnitin systems that for a heavily cited work, it is seen as
Yeah.
completely. So it even with the proper citations, it's seeing it as
Yes.
And I mean, to the point of the proctoring systems. I mean, if you're not anyone else in the room, anyone walking through the room is seen as cheating. So what if you live in a place where there isn't a space that you can isolate? What if a pet runs through? What if your younger sister runs through? What if you need an attendant, etc.? All of those are also, so it really doesn't take into account there's a specific assumption about what a student is. A student is someone that can isolate themselves in a single room, can stay there on camera without anyone talking, etc. I love that you've been able to change the settings. Some proctoring systems don't allow that. And even the notion of requiring this notion of cheating is something that is very problematic, because we shouldn't be teaching things that are sufficiently formulaic that you can have cheating. We should be creating cheat-proof tests, right? That because if in fact, the real life situation is you'll be able to look up things. You would have access to ways of searching. You would have access to a calculator. So why can't we create a real life situation? The prediction or the probability of and the outcomes of the tests at the moment are completely disconnected from real life. We don't need to memorize everything. What we need to do is do higher order thinking that doesn't require or that allows us to depend on those formulaic things and memorization in other ways. So yeah, I like the points that you're bringing up.
Well, my past college professors never needed any fancy artificial intelligence software really to catch me cheating really in my work really. So I just thought they'd have that really. I was wondering too, has artificial intelligence is it being used to catch these ransomware, hackers? It seems like that body of knowledge, could be put to use, or
Yeah,
it doesn't have the potential to be put to use to catch those people.
No, the problem with many of the security systems is that it isn't. So those ransomware hackers, etc., are the weak signals, right? But instead, what we don't focus so much on the false negatives, but more on the false positives. So yes, it isn't. To your point, it's not being put to use in the things that we really need it in.
I absolutely appreciate and support the concerns about, sort of homogenizing education, where you're sort of using these tools to kind of direct people's styles of thinking towards some average, some target, which is maybe great if you need a workforce that's totally replaceable. People, you train 1,000 widgets for 1,000 widget jobs, then great. But more important than having 1,000, having all your widget jobs filled with people who have identical approaches to being a widget, is what you talked about earlier, what you mentioned at some point about the importance of diverse thinking for a larger pool of problem solvers and in a better, a more resilient society because of the input from a diverse set of perspectives and thinking styles. Can't they develop, and shouldn't they, or maybe they eventually will, because I think we're kind of early in this whole AI development history, that they would create AI that that nurtures diversity, that provides scaffolding for diverse ways of solving problems or framing problems. And you know, so that if a cultural group that kind of collectively has an approach or a perspective, that could be preserved, that it wouldn't be weeded out or encouraged out or trained out. It seems like that's a fruitful area of research to explore.
Yeah, and of course, you're getting at a few things as well. The people that make those AI systems are the Silicon Valley, largely white male developers
Yes.
that are there, and so they are going to create students in their own likeness, and even things like smart compass, or which is supposed to help you with typing speed by predicting what the next word is, etc. Or the autocomplete, which try typing an unusual word that isn't among the majority words or among the corpus of a few words that are recognized. Everything is shaping us in such a way that it stops the diversification. But I mean, this is a pattern of the past, right? I mean, our education system has been focused on creating standardized conformant learners, not by supporting students in diversifying themselves and creating the most optimal version of themselves rather than the optimal version of what we see as the ideal student. So what you're saying, Al, requires, it certainly isn't happening with even very advanced machine learning, because machine learning is a probability engine. And so it uses data and it optimizes what is seen as optimal within the data. So what we need to, and in large part, that's because we've been so focused on replacing human intelligence, so if you look at the Turing Test, which is supposedly the ultimate test for the success of AI, can it be indistinguishable between the performance of a machine and the performance of a human? And so all of our challenges have been, can we replace human intelligence rather than can we do the things that humans can't do well? Can we augment human intelligence? Can we create systems that will help us with our limited thinking? Because people have great difficulty in dealing with diversity and complexity. We like to categorize, we like to sort and filter, we like a single winning solution, we like a best practice. We talk about winning and best, and as though there's only one. I mean, as though the ideal is this pinnacle, as opposed to recognizing the spectrum and being able to deal with the spectrum of choices, of quality, etc. And so what we've done with the AI is we've just accelerated that, rather than, so one of the other examples that I use is complexity theorists, and talk about the global versus the local optima, and this exercise of hill climbing. So if you think about a very complex terrain of many mountains and valleys, if we keep optimizing the way that we're going, we're climbing up what we call a local optima or a local hill. We know that if we keep going in the direction that we're going right now, things won't be sustainable. We'll have increased disparity. All of these things that are happening are going to happen even more. And so we keep optimizing based on patterns of the past. We keep climbing up the hill. And in the process, we're also eroding the hill so that it's harder for the people at the bottom to get to the top. When in fact, we shouldn't be climbing this hill at all. We should be climbing a much higher hill that has a plateau that will get us all out of crisis. But we're never going to find it if we keep repeating what we're doing. And the people that are best at detecting where the next hill are actually the people at the bottom. They're not complacent. They're not successful at this local hill climbing. They have a much broader view in that they occupy a much larger domain. And so we actually need to go backwards. We need to
Go down
down the hill.
cross
Right.
the valley and find another hill.
Yeah. So that means risking failure, risking all sorts of things, and find the other. Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, that took so long.
yeah, no, that's great. I love that. And I think that's exactly right about, the landscape, these hills that are suboptimal and you're stuck on that one. I think that's a great description of our problem. And I guess I just wonder, and there's so little time. There's so much to talk about. There's so little time. I just wonder, talking about AI and deep learning, could there not be some way that you could teach an AI system to map this larger landscape of hills that we individuals are stuck, that we can see because we're stuck on the hill that we're on? I agree that the non-convergent thinkers are the ones that can point in the right direction. But is there, in addition to that, is there a possibility that AI could help, draw up that landscape to help us, those who are more divergent thinkers?
Yeah, I think we need to rethink AI in general because machine learning is probabilistic. But the irony is that rather that machines can be parallel learners, right? We've turned them into these systems that optimize the past, as opposed to machines, if we designed them correctly, could help us navigate that complexity and understand the diversity better. Even when we're talking about personalization, individualization, recognizing diverse pattern, pluralistic machines, we're still in every case using a statistical significance and quantitative methods. We're just breaking the process down into tiny chunks, as opposed to rethinking completely how we arrive at optimal. And that gets to the point that you were making earlier about the debate about quality, and
right,
because we still think that quality is the average, the typical, the standard.
The average, and that is not necessarily quality.
No.
Well, I don't want to. I have one final question, but I'd like to let others take a chance to take the opportunity to ask a question if you have, in the abundant 7 minutes that we have left.
There are really great articles that make your point that I can refer you to, that sort of argue against what's happening and support your position.
Oh, I would appreciate it if you could send me some sources. I have done some research on this because I'm a writing instructor, and the machine grading of papers has been around for a long time. So I'm familiar with that discussion, and I actually participated in it just to learn how that works and what's wrong with it. So I'm not completely unfamiliar, and it always makes me sad, that these people just don't appreciate writing, and they would prefer to run it through a machine and put a grade on it rather than take it for what I think writing was meant to be, as a source of communication and meaning making. So yeah, but any source that you have I would be happy to share. So I don't know how you guys share, or you can email or something.
Yeah, I'll send it to Al, and he can, or we can post it up on the wiki as well.
Yes, yes.
And
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I mean, you raised some great points. Grading itself, of course, is assuming that
Mhm.
all students need to be ranked on a single scale. So it also homogenizes students, as opposed to variable ways of assessing, determining what's optimal for that particular student, and encouraging them to optimize that differentiation. The other thing that AI is employed in is in selecting students. So if there's a competitive admission process, then determining who will be the optimal students to select, or, the students that will get an interview, the students that are given a chance to attend a particular program. AI is frequently used, and that, of course, filters out any students that are unlike the norm.
It's probably too late to ask my question, but what I'll ask is maybe if you could just send some, suggest some reading, or maybe one of your talks that touches on. You started off, or early in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that there are ways of making the democratic process more inclusive. So you don't have a majority of people with trivial priorities versus people with really a smaller group that has really critical issues that don't get heard or don't get included in the discussion. How does that get fixed? And maybe, and you don't have, it'll take more than 4 minutes. So I think maybe that's something we have to read and maybe discuss at another time.
Yeah, so there are experiments at the moment, such as fluid democracy and a few others, where it's not only so that the individuals that are most impacted by a decision are the ones that have their vote is weighted more on in a particular decision than people that are just random, or that are not connected with a particular decision. The other, of course, is rights-based, so determining rights and defending the rights of individuals who are currently excluded. There are also democratic processes where one of the things regarding representation is that the whole or the most powerful are usually overrepresented. The least powerful are less represented. So choosing and giving precedence to people who cannot use or have difficulty with the current system that's there, and not deciding with not using first out of the gate. There's all sorts of, there's a whole range of different things that, we've seen how fallible our democratic systems are at the moment. But the problem is that when democracy is threatened, we reduce and we defend and we stop self-critiquing, because anything that we say about the current system is seen as a point for the opposition, as opposed to taking the risk to say, well, we agree some of these things don't work very well and we need to improve. So the first victim to a opposition tends to be self-critique, and first victim to polarization tends to be self-critique, which of course causes a stasis or retraction of any improvements that can be made. Luckily, certainly the democratic process, I'm in Canada, but
oh, right.
we're so happy that Um,
What's happening here isn't happening there.
yeah, well, that the threat that caused that retraction and defense by reduction is not happening south of the border. We're sleeping beside it. We're a mouse sleeping beside an elephant. So anything that happens in the U.S. Definitely has an impact on us here.
Yeah, very good. You know, and the only thing I would add to everything that you said is the importance, especially when you're talking about a democratic system that depends on a good, thoughtful decision making on the part of everybody who participates in the democratic process. What that depends on, the bread and butter, the driver, the whatever the right word is, of that is accurate, good information. You know, that you're making decisions based on good information. And what our democratic process now is more dependent on emotions and not actual facts and information. And I think that's where we're seeing a huge failure on the part of our system, that we're not preserving, we're not comprised of good decision makers because we don't value good information.
Mm-hmm.
At least we don't seem to. But anyway, let me get off of my soapbox there. Does anybody have any final comments? I think this was a fantastic conversation. I'm glad it's recorded. We'll share it, and I think we're going to need to, explore this more in the future. We've scratched the surface, and we want to get into the depth of deep learning. So, unless Jutta, anything final that you'd like to
yeah.
mention?
So, and every time someone speaks, there's another point the one point I wanted to make is often my assertions are argued against. If you pay attention to the edge, then aren't you catering to extremists, and aren't you causing greater extremism? And that's completely fallacious, because the more diverse opinions you have, the more you prevent that polarization and extremism. Because think of it like a pendulum that keeps swinging back and forth, and that is in fact a two-party system where that is happening. If you look at the history of politics in the US. Now, if you take that pendulum and you start having forces from a whole spectrum of places, then what happens is the pendulum won't go out to those extremes. It starts to just go in a circle. And of course, that's a very simplistic physics based, but the same phenomena happens within human engagement as well. The more you give room to a diversity of perspectives and don't require that everybody belongs to one pole or the other, the less likely the more you buffer the conversation from that extremism.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of sense, and that's where having I won't make any more comments because that'll just go on to. We will continue the discussion. Thank you so much, Jutta. This was really, really interesting and I think fruitful. And I do look forward to more.
Right. And Doug, actually, you're sitting there with a very quizzical face. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, like what you folks just last said, our society won't change really until people can get it out of their heads really that their person or their candidate should be in office really, and thinking that they're going to get something in return really by putting their familiar people back in office really. Until people get that out of their minds really, that they're going to receive some reward really for putting their old friend back into office. So our society is not going to change. Right?
Yeah. And of course, that ripples through academia. And Al, there's another conversation there.
Yep.
Of peer review and things like that.
Right, definitely
Disciplinary silos and yeah,
to be continued. Absolutely,
Yeah.
for sure.
yeah, great.
Well,
Okay.
again, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for participating.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll
Thank
see
you.
you.
Bye.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.